Hey, we're back here at O'Galley Boat Works, working on the Pearson 323 that's been in our yard for a little while. We started by taking out a Yanmar 2GM20 and we're replacing it with a rebuilt 3GM30. The only difference between the two engines is it's got one more cylinder. And what we're going to be doing right now is we're going to be putting on the governor weight and needle bearing. This is part of the fuel management system. Diesel engines run mechanically and the fuel is injected mechanically. And based on the rotation speed of the crankshaft, this meters the fuel. Ooh, it's stuck now. And that's how that goes in place. These weights around here, depending on the speed of the crankshaft, will move this needle bearing and thrust washer in or out to be able to, what comes here, to tell the injector pump how much fuel to put in each individual injector. Okay, this is a diesel engine fuel injector for this specific model, 3GM30. These three holes are pretty much the spots where the injector goes. They feed directly into the top of the combustion chamber. That's how diesel ignites. There's no spark plug in a diesel engine. It's just ignited by compression alone. Later on, after we put the rocker arm cover back on, we are going to be putting the fuel injectors into place. Now, there are several parts that go along with it. On the very bottom, there's a pre-combustion chamber cap, and then a gasket, and then the injector goes in, and a piece of metal straddles this and torqued down to specific torque rating, and then connected to the rest of the fuel system. So, as the crankshaft's turning over here, telling the fuel injector pump what to do, that fuel is getting metered and sent to each individual fuel injector at the correct time that it needs to happen. Top dead, or just prior to top dead center on the compression stroke of the diesels. We're placing a second fuel injector in the top of the head, and here's the third fuel injector. There is a fuel rail that later on gets connected through a banjo fitting on 3 different spots, actually 6 different spots. Fuel comes in through the top, and then any unused fuel that's not involved in the combustion process goes back to the fuel return, and it's sent back to the fuel tank. Later on in the rebuild process, we are going to be putting a cover over this entire assembly that has the actual throttle lever. But while we have it open, it's a good time to show you the fuel injector pump and how it actually works with the engine. I'm holding it in place over the injection cam, and these roller bearings on the bottom are actually plungers that will take fuel from the fuel tank, and as the cam rolls up, it pushes fuel up through a metal tube that later ends up in the injector. So most people don't get to see this, but this is where it kind of mates up with it, and it is indeed the heart of the engine.
Go ahead.
All right, here's an example. Here's an example of the fuel injector pump and the roller bearings where they come into contact with the fuel injection timing cam. It's driven by these other gears at a certain rate in relation to the rotation of the crankshaft. Okay, now we got an inside shot of what's going on with the fuel injection pump. On the very bottom of the pump itself, you can see these roller bearings, which actually ride on top of this cam lobe, which is known as the injection timing cam. It's driven off the main crankshaft, so that as the engine's rotating, we'll be installing this fuel injection pump. But while we have the cover off, we get to see, later on during a rebuild process, we will be installing the fuel injection pump, which I have here held where it's going to exist. On the very bottom of the fuel injection pump, you can see roller bearings, which when it's installed, ride on top of the cam lobes that are going here. The fuel injection timing cam basically plunges these needle bearings, roller bearings, up and squirting fuel through a tube into the fuel injection later. What I'm doing now is I'm dry fitting the heat exchange tank. This is where salt water and the engine coolant are mixed, not mixed together, but run through what's called a heat exchanger, acting much like a car radiator does. Now, older engines used to use just raw seawater to cool them, but the more modern diesels use a heat exchange system. One of the most important factors of a heat exchange system is you're not bringing salt water into the iron engine. That had been a big problem because over time that salt water is going to eat at the metal and eventually cause the engine to fail in one way or another. So as this engine's built, this is where the heat exchanger tank is, and we have a heat exchanger over here. Look. Okay, this is the actual heat exchanger. There is the raw water side and the coolant side. Raw water is basically the salt water. Salt water flows through tubes, and on the outside of these tubes, in a separate system, coolant is flowed when it flows through the engine, and it's put into the heat exchange tank somewhat like this. Okay, a little bit later in the process of building the engine, we're going to be setting what's called the valve clearance. Each one of these rocker arms here contacts the top of the valve, which either lets air and fuel mixture in or closes to allow the combustion process to happen. And once those have been set, using these set screws, we'll be able to put on the rocker box cover, which sits on it like that. And on the bottom of this particular Yanmar model uses an O-ring instead of a gasket, which is one of the things that we're doing as we're rebuilding this engine. We're replacing all of the gaskets everywhere. Making sure that we're not going to have any leaks between oil and coolant, or seawater and fresh water, and basically it seals the engine up tight for proper operation. Okay, later on in the rebuild process, we're going to be setting what's known as the valve height clearance. What you see where I'm pointing to, these are rocker arms, and they're operated by the engine's main camshaft that's kind of in the internals of the engine. We set these to about 8 thousandths, a clearance between the tip of the valve and the rocker arm. And what that does is it allows, make sure that the timing of the valve train is correct. If a valve is open at the wrong time, or if it's set too tightly, you can bend the valve or the push rod that's there. And once we've gotten that all set, we can then put on the rocker box cover. Yanmar uses an O-ring on the rocker box cover, and this is one of the things that, one of the seals that we are replacing on this engine, along with every gasket that's available to change, simply so we can have a sealed up tight engine. Okay. What I have here in my hands is the timing gear cover. These being the timing gears, including the fuel injection cam, the governor, and the actual camshaft of the engine. They're all geared together because how an engine works, like an air compressor in the background. Go. What I have here in my hands is the timing gear cover. It's when the engine's finally fully installed and put together, it covers up the fuel injection cam, the governor flyweights, and the gearing that drives all the three together. Inside this, you can see where what looks like a little wishbone meets up with this needle bearing that's rolling around on the crankshaft. And that is connected to the throttle lever, which isn't quite on the timing gear cover, but later on it will be. So when you actually step on the gas, so to speak, this device steps on this, on the flywheel here, and the needle bearing, and so on and so forth. Okay, what I have here is the timing gear cover. This covers up the governor flyweights, the cam gear, and the fuel injection timing cam. And this small piece inside the gear cover, which looks like a wishbone, actually rides on this needle bearing right here. And depending on the position of the throttle, based on the captain's input, it tells the engine how much fuel to allow to the fuel injection timing pump. So we're making sure that we get all the old gasket material off before we put a new gasket on there. And start using like a scraper tool and then finish it up with the wire wheel. One of the most important things when you're rebuilding an engine and replacing gaskets is removing all of the old gasket. You can't have any of it left behind, because what that does is it creates an imperfect seal. That's where oil can leak out or any of the other fluids. I'm finishing this off with a wire brush. Well, here we have the dipstick tube fitting. And it mounts on the side of the engine, and this is where the actual dipstick goes to measure the amount of oil you have in your crankshaft pan.
He took that boat back to water line. Yeah, I remember the thing. I just want to see if they do it.
All right, I have here in the vise the raw water pump. This actually sucks seawater through the through hole in the boat and pumps it through the heat exchanger. And what I'm doing now is removing the plate covering the impeller so I can inspect, and we are replacing this particular impeller.